question about when lawyers are involved, or if they need to build a case, so to speak. Is it the lawyer's job to build a case such as you were laying out to convince the judge that this really is in quote-unquote the best interest of the child? Is that really what you have to do? You were starting to talk about the time that it takes to, I don't get on a plane, a boat, and a train, and what it costs, and this outweighs that. I mean, is that what your job is?
Yes, and part of what you're also looking at is all the other factors that go into who should have custody, the opportunities for the child, where that child is going to be moved to, what family does the child have around, because the child has the parents, but there's also the family influence. If you move a child whose whole family on both sides is in Rhode Island, for example, well, the judge may want to look at that and say, I don't know that that's in the child's best interest. How old is the child? Does the child want to move?
Okay, let's get back to the bottom line question again. Now, if it's a stepfather who has the better job and wants to move mom and the child away, bottom line question, so is the stepfather's higher salary, does that carry the day with the judge?
No, absolutely not. No, the stepfather's not responsible for supporting the child to begin with, but absolutely not. Again, you go back to the standard, the best interest.
I would say this, though. If somebody's got a better job opportunity in another state, then that satisfies what I called prong one, that there's a real legitimate reason to move. But that's not going to have any influence on prong two, which is what's in the child's best interest, stay here or go.
Yeah, the other thing, too, is important is somebody comes in my office and says, I want to leave the state, and my question to them is, well, tell me why, tell me what's going on in your life, who you're involved with, who's going to be there. So we have to investigate before we even decide if we're going to litigate this case. If someone comes into me and says, no, well, I met somebody 3 weeks ago and I want to move on the internet, and the internet has been a minefield lately for family court practitioners, but yeah, I mean, I'd certainly say absolutely not. I mean, you're going to lose.
That doesn't attest to stability.
There's no stability there. Yeah.
Right.
All you're doing is just hurting the child.
That's right. And stability is one of the factors that a judge will look at.
Yeah.
So that's something that our viewers should take note of. If you want to build a case and there's a convincing element, that stability far outweighs who has a bigger paycheck.
Right.
Yeah. And don't forget, if they just take the child out of state without there being a court order and the other parent hasn't agreed to it, you've got a serious problem now.
As in?
Well, if the other parent has a custody order too, or joint custody arrangement, there's possible kidnapping charges.
As we've heard.
Yeah, and you're going to run to, you had that case where we ran to court and filed an emergency order preventing the parent from, we thought in this case, was going to leave the country.
Right.
This is not, it's pretty serious. There was, in the news not too recently, a Rhode Island person whose wife took the child, was it to Japan?
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the other issue is what state is going to be the home state for the child for purposes of further litigation if necessary. And I saw a case today, actually, where the woman had moved from Rhode Island to New Hampshire. And she's been living there for 3 years, but there's been ongoing, since the time she moved, constant litigation about visitation, when the husband's going to be able to, the father is going to be able to visit, and so forth. And today she argued to the judge a motion, pro se, to change New Hampshire to the home state. And the judge listened to her, and he said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to give this case to another judge who doesn't know the history. I'm going to hold on to it. And she argued that it was expensive for her to drive to Rhode Island for the court hearings. And he said, you're the one who chose to move to New Hampshire. You knew that when you moved, and I let you go. But I told you when you left that I'm retaining jurisdiction because I want to make sure that the fellow who stayed home, the father, gets his visitation.
So it was more of a temporary order, it wasn't a permanent order?
Well,
it wasn't a judgment.
No, but it's an order that's being reviewed every 3 or 4 months.
So what David's alluding to in terms of jurisdiction is the states have what's called a Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Enforcement Act. Basically what that says is wherever the child lives with the parent for 6 months or more, that state is going to be deemed the home state for custody and jurisdiction purposes. So what that woman was saying is, I've been in New Hampshire for more than 6 months under the UCCJEA. New Hampshire should have jurisdiction. And in this case, rightfully so, the judge did not defer jurisdiction there because he kept the case active in Rhode Island.
Yeah, the case came out of a Rhode Island order.
That's right.
And a part of his original order was, I'm going to review this case.
In the last 2 minutes of our segment, address, if you will, the child abuse issues which often result in the removal of a child. We know that the state prefers that the child could be with a parent, and maybe if they made a slight mistake and the child could be safe in the home if mom has a little parenting skills or dad has some assistance that way. What happens with the issue about abuse, whether it's first abuse of the parents, one of the parents? If you could address that, what happens? What's the procedure and when's there a removal?
It's a DCYF type of case where a complaint may be made on the hotline, child abuse hotline or somewhere, and an investigator goes out, and if there's a founded charge of abuse, then they petition the court to get custody. Custody goes to DCYF, and then they're able to remove the child out of the home and place the child in some foster home somewhere. And at one time, it was these night-to-night placements that became a
Yes.
big issue, and there was litigation over. But the idea is, first and foremost, to protect the child. So if there is any threat to a child of potential harm, they're going to err on the side of getting the child away from that.
Sometimes they'll just work with the families, like if somebody is recovering from alcoholism, they give the parent the ability to go into treatment, go into counseling, and in that particular case, the goal would be to reunify the child with the
Right.
parent.
Yes.
So when the court feels that the parent has basically rehabilitated himself or herself, then at that point, then the parent can petition for custody.
Right. And the whole overarching goal here is reunification. You don't want to break families up.
Yeah.
But if there's a situation where someone's not following the plan that's been laid out and it goes on and on and on, they don't want to keep the child in limbo either.
It certainly makes sense that they would want to try to support the family, solidify it, stabilize it, as you indicate, give them training whenever they need to. If there's a separation and a parent is with if the parent has custody, there is now another male on the scene, and there is now reported or suspected abuse. When it comes to child removal, does that make the state move more quickly than trying to work with counseling?
Sure, yeah, if
How
it's
does that
imminent abuse,
Yeah, and
Other than a parent?
well, here's the
well, yeah, if a
thing.
parent's living with a sex offender,
Right.
They're going to take the child
What
away.
the DCYF, I think, typically would do, or whoever's
So
making the
get rid
decision,
of
is
the
say,
person.
you keep your child, get rid of the person.
Yeah,
And they're able to do that? They
Yeah,
can-
and if the
they-
person doesn't want, they
Ultimatum.
can't force the person out. If they
Yeah.
don't want, if the parent doesn't want to do that, then they'll take the child.
yeah, they will. Yeah.
Would they be likely to take the child, put him in an institution or foster placement, or give
No.
it to the other parent?
If the other parent is there,
Yeah.
then they have to give the first option to the other
Right.
parent.
And if the other
Sometimes
parent,
grandparents,
I was going to say,
yeah,
the
yeah.
other parent can't do it, then another family member
So-
is usually the first step.
That's an important thing to know. I think it sounds right that the family court does want to keep families together whenever possible, support them when they can. Certainly there are so many stories about where there have been failings in the system, but it's good to know that there at least is interest in doing that, even if they fall short-handed at times and there are problems. Obviously, with the child removal cases such as they are, it's a very challenging story. We're happy that you were with us, that you could learn a little bit more. Hopefully it prepares you if you should have to deal with any of these issues. We thank you for joining us. We hope you'll stay tuned. Hopefully early anticipation of some of these problems can avoid them. You've certainly given us enough information to help that happen. Thank you for staying tuned. Our conversation about legal matters will continue. Please stay tuned and join us.